So it's really a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm very pleased, but also honored that you asked the Commission as a policy-making body to address this audience of people who are in the field day to day doing the open access, because that's the big difference. Of course, we try to make the policy, but you guys and ladies have to do it. And by the way, we don't try to do it ourselves. We try to do it in a co-design way, in a co-creation way, and that's why it is important for us, and why I'm really pleased that you ask us to talk to you, to be here, and to engage in discussions, because as we have said many times, and in particular in the policy platform, open science policy is not something that should be, if at all possible, should be done top-down, but should be developed bottom-up in co-creation with the stakeholders, and you are a very important stakeholder in that respect. So it's a sincere thank you. I wish I could join more of your meetings, really not only in Lisbon, because that's a nice city to come to, but okay, it is more time restrictions that make it, that impede more interaction, but okay, we do our best. So what I was asked to do and what I propose today is to give a quick overview of the open access policies with regard to publishing that we are doing, or that we are trying to stimulate in the Commission, and where we think we should be going. The slides you can Twitter and quote, the things I say in between, sometimes I fall out of my role of civil servant, so that I would ask you to maybe not attribute to the Commission. So for example, this one. So, okay, let me start. First of all the policies we do on open access, and some of you have seen this slide, is because not because we think it is something isolated, it's because open access is part of a much wider change which is going on today in the scientific world, and that's the change towards open science. And open science is actually a systemic transition of the science system, which, as you can see there, affects all the parts of the life cycle of a research project, of a research endeavor. So it is much more than only open access. It is much more than only collaborative. It's much more than data-driven science. Open science is all that together, and it affects deeply the stakeholders, all kinds of stakeholders, the publishers, but also the researchers, the universities, the funders, and so on. I can think that it's quite a no-brainer to say that what is going on now is probably the deepest change that we have seen in the scientific institutional way of doing things and the systemic way of doing things since the introduction of the computer. So I really think that in the 70s that we are facing something where we only have started to scratch what is coming, and then indeed, if you, as you said in your introduction, looking forward, I think for publishers there is a lot to be looked at in the coming years, and a lot of opportunities, but also challenges. So it is, as I said, I mean, in a certain sense, for those who know this kind of analysis of Carlota Perez, open science is for the scientific system a kind of a techno-economic paradigm shift, which is disruptive, fundamentally disruptive, and hence disturbing, but also full of opportunities. So that's a little bit the picture in which we put our work, and this is a picture which we have not drawn up ourselves. We have done, for those who were probably involved in it, we have done a lot of consultancies, a lot of questionnaires, a lot of research ourselves 2-3 years ago, before coming up with what we thought was the system change that is for the moment going on in science. And if you want to represent it in a figure, the green is the traditional way, or the classical way no, it's not the classical way. These are the elements, the normal elements, or the basic elements of a scientific process. The way it was done in the past was premium closed and non-collaborative to a large degree, and everything that you see around it is the new way of doing things, which all goes in the same direction. It is open, it is collaborative, it is less premium, and so on. The names that you see there, I mean, I didn't want to favor conflict of interest. I didn't want to favor any one of you or disfavor any one of you, but this is simply to show to the non-believers that what is going on is real and it is not something invented. So there is a whole ecosystem of new services and standards that is being put in place in measuring, in conceptualizing, in gathering, and so on, research and data. So open access, and that is different to the debate 10, 15 years ago when the debate on open access started, is only one part of it. It's not the only part of the discussion, it is part of a broader system change. So, and it means that the discussion on open access is much more than what it used to be 15 years ago or 20 years ago, where it was to a very large extent also a little bit of an ideological discussion, and it becomes now a kind of system discussion. And that is, I think, very important, because for the future it means, it has a lot of repercussions. I come back to that in a second. So on that basis, this is the two slides that I have to show you. On that basis of seeing this system change, the Commission, once again in co-design, co-creation, consulting, God knows who, came up with 8 priorities for open science policy, which our commissioner, so the Commissioner for Research and Innovation, who is, by the way, from Lisbon, from Lisboa, made then his key deliverables for the pillar open science. And we have 4 deliverables to be made by the end of his mandate, meaning 2019-20, which are at the part of results and data. You see them listed there. So the first one is open data should be fair and should be default for all publicly funded research. Secondly, all European researchers should be able to have a trusted third party for sharing and connecting this data across member states and across disciplines. That's the European Open Science Cloud, which is my second big project which we are working on, is trying to put in place the European Open Science Cloud, and I'm more than happy to talk to any one of you to that after this on what it means, because it's an enormous endeavor. Thirdly, to come up with an agreed way of measuring the new ways by which science is done. I often said the alt metrics. Maybe we should go for complementary metrics, but okay, what's in the name? But that's the third deliverable which we would like to deliver. And then finally, all peer-reviewed scientific publications should be freely accessible. The dates, the end of the mandate of Commissioner Moedas, 2019-2020. So not only for ourselves, but that is ex officio so, but also for the rest of Europe. So we're trying to work on all these issues in parallel, full open data, the Science Cloud, which will probably be launched at the end of next year, an agreement on altmetrics, which we will try to do by the end of last year or the beginning of 2019, and then full open access, which we would like to have by the end of the present framework program, Horizon 2020. There are also 4 softer, if you want, ambitions of our open science policy. I'm not going to go into the details, you see them there, but they are linked, of course, to the systemic picture which we were talking about. This is looking into how to reward open access and open science activities. What does open access and open data mean from the point of view of research integrity, and so on. And so on, the whole issue of education and skills, which I think is a little bit underplayed and underestimated, but which is extremely important for if we want Europe to become a fully up to speed with data-driven science. We really are lacking some of the key skills there in terms of curation, data mining, and so on. But okay, you see them there. So let's now zoom in on open access. So open access is part of the broader picture. It has always been a discussion oscillating between, as you know, the 2 main models for open access, gold and green. I don't have to explain you that. We also know what it is not all about. It has been a policy for quite a few years now, where we started with open access in FP7 and will go to default or are going to default open access in between, and one step further, as I will explain in a second. So the situation as it is for the moment is that there is an obligation since FP7 to provide open access, either way, green or gold. There are, as you know, there are embargo periods, 6 or 12 months. The costs for open access that you, as a funder, so as from the point of view of Horizon 2020, the incurred costs are eligible for reimbursement as part of the project budget. And then, of course, we encourage all the authors to retain copyright and grant the licenses instead. So it is already a well-established practice to have mandatory open access as Horizon 2020 funder. As I said, in parallel, we try to work with the key funders in Europe to make it, to try to go the same road as the Commission does here. We consider this leading by example. But that is, I think, a picture which you know. If you plot it on a scheme, well, that's more or less how it grew. Eh? So from a pilot almost 10 years ago to slowly becoming mandatory for green and gold, and then the open research data pilot, which started in 2014, to going to full open access for publications and data from September onwards, meaning now in the last part of Horizon 2020. And of course, we will go the same way for FP9, Framework Program 9, which will start in 2021. So this is what what has been done at the level of the Commission. And by the way, the Commission is composed of 28, well, the Union is 28 member states. So this is not only a Brussels thing, this is also what the member states achieved, and that is quite important to say. So if you put it in this perspective, actually in 10 years' time, a lot of progress has been made. If you think about it, 10 years, if you would have said in 2008 that in 2017 open access would be mandatory and default across the board for the whole program, I don't think many people would have wanted to bet a bottle on that. So that's where we are. I think together we made a lot of progress there, and that is only encouraging. Now, where are we? So the latest figures which we were able to process on that is that between, let's say, depends on how you count it, between 60 and 70% of the publications funded through Horizon 2020 are currently in open access, so 2/3. That's quite a big success, I would say, but not enough. The ratio green to gold is 3:1, which is also something which I must say we did not anticipate. We would have expected maybe a slighter 2:2 ratio, but anyway, this is what it is, 3:1. The average article APC per publication in Horizon 2020 is around $1,000 and euro. And the average embargo period is around 11 months. However, we still not have the target of, as you can see, of 100%, but the figures, they are there. So 60 to 70%, 3:1, €1,000, and then the embargo period of around 11 months, although one out of three publications have no embargo at all, which is also something which we didn't anticipate so much when we started working on it 10 years ago. In the meantime, as I said, the whole discussion on open access was broadened to get out of the sphere of publishers and scientists. It became a quite political discussion at the same time, with a lot of political support, and these are for policymakers important points. I'm sure you probably don't come across these in your day-to-day practice all the time, but for us it's important to refer to, first of all, the Competitiveness Council, which is meaning all the member states that can decide on these topics sitting together, gave full support to full open access, one of the priorities of our commissioner by 2020 in May 2016. So that means that all member states endorse the action, which is politically very important. The Amsterdam Call of Action of April last year was also member states driven, presidency event, supports the same kind of messages. So politically we can say that the dossier is completely going into the direction of full open access. As I said, when looking at the figures, we on the one hand this is a positive bilan, but on the other hand we are still missing a lot of the output. So it's only 60 to 70% of our publications. So we started looking at it. What can we do about that? And then I think I'm slowly coming into the part of the speech the presentation which you probably didn't hear about as such. So, first of all, we have decided on a few things in order to try to get to the ambition of 100% full open access by 2020. First of all, reinforce monitoring and incentives. And how does it come that where are these 30%? What is the reason? What can we do about it? Secondly, mainstreaming fair data across Horizon 2020 and FP9, which is actually now becoming mandatory from September onwards for all the new proposals, but which we hope will also create an incentive for going towards 100% of open access, because it will help in changing the scientific culture. We also have set up the Open Science Policy Platform in which some of you are working with us in order to, amongst others, put up to the table this issue of going towards full open access. So it is a part of the instruments, of the techniques, if I may say so, to help us getting there, because we hope that the policy platform, which is composed of the main stakeholders of the scientific world in Europe, publishers, researchers, research institutions, and so on. So we hope that this will be instrumental for us to mobilize their constituencies to go towards the 100%. And then we have set up several expert groups which are doing work with us in trying to figure out what more needs to be done and what can be done, and I come back to that in a second. In parallel, all the political discussions, but that is not so important today. We also see that the debate is not only, so the debate, if you see it historically, was a very much research publisher-centered debate 10 years ago, became quite political the last 2 to 3 years, and is also becoming a bit broader than the normal discussions about gold or green. What we see happening in the real world is that we see new models that are emerging in terms of open access publishing in a way which was not conceivable 10 to 15 years ago. You see some of the examples there, without again favoring any of these examples. The one you mentioned there, but we see the models appearing. In particular, I would say the second bullet, which were not on the market 15 years ago, which were simply inconceivable or not conceived 15 years ago. So that is a quite interesting development. So it means that also the market is changing, and that as a result of that, the discussion becomes a little bit different in terms of looking at what is possible. We also see that there are new projects delivering alternative ways for open access, like what is going on under Open Up. And we see also that increasingly member states come to us discussing about what can we do about it, how can we do the negotiations on the big deals, and so on. So the debate becomes much broader than it used to be. It goes outside this room, if you want, so like it or not, but that's the reality. It is much more a debate on political ambitions and also on new models to deliver full open access, which were not conceivable 10 to 15 years ago. Why? Because the technologies were not there. And that's actually something we tend to forget. You can actually have micro publications in full open access simply by using the technologies available, or you can do it on a massive scale, as some of you here in the room do in the meantime. And that is being made possible by technologies and by systems which were tested somewhere else, like in Facebook and like in Amazon. But that's another story. At the same time, the debate becomes also sharper. And I'm sorry for the targeted editor here, but you know, things like this, where these are the Finns putting up on a website that they no longer want to go with the editor mentioned there, and that they are really mobilizing themselves in order to refuse the big deals. This was, as far as I know, inconceivable 10 to 15 years ago. And this is only one example. There are many more examples of how the debate becomes a little bit sharper for some of you in the publishing field, which means that if you look at it as from a political point of view, this means that the point of heating has been reached in a certain sense, and that things will no longer be so smooth as we used to think about it. So if you put all that together, of course, and the possibilities, new market models, a lot of political pressure, this kind of activities, it's quite clear that things will change in the next short to mid-term. This is unstoppable. And it is good that all of you are sitting here to think about how to make this future possible. So that all, in the Commission then, if we looked at all this, the Commissioner said, well, we can't go on debating forever. So we should do something about this. We now know the problem, we know the alternatives, we know what is possible. We know why we can't move faster. We also know the bottlenecks. So what can we do ourselves as a big funder of research in order to push the debate into the right, not the debate, the field into the right direction? And that's where we came up with the idea of launching as a part of a service of Horizon 2020. So please note it precisely. It's part of a service of Horizon 2020. To launch our own open research publication platform, which as working title has now Open Research Europe. By the way, there is an R missing there, Europe. But that's probably the Portuguese way of saying Europe. Anyway, so the idea is, once more, as a service of Horizon 2020, for those participating in 2020, to offer a platform for peer-reviewed publication of standalone articles and related preprints. So the idea is, of course, not so spectacular. The Wellcome Trust does it, the Gates Foundation does it, some of the public funders are doing it. It is exactly the same idea which we are launching here. So we will launch that as a service for those who are participating in our programs of Horizon 2020, as an option, as a complementary option. So it is not compulsory, it is complementary. In order to actually to meet two concerns which we had when we started asking the researchers, how does it come that you don't comply with the obligation of open access? Why is there still this 40% missing? We always got two responses. First of all, it is too expensive. Secondly, it takes too much time. Well, this is an instrument to at least to remedy this if the researcher or the consortium, with the opting out and all the things that you can think about, decides so. Of course, what will be launched is not simply a dumping site. It must be something which is up to standard, to the best possible editing practices, and it must contain mechanisms for open, collaborative public peer review, because we would like to push into the direction of public peer review, because that's part of the reward system. If peer reviewing is rewarded for your career, you will have less problems to find a good peer review. So it's a little bit part of this systemic picture on open science, and we also want a suite of innovative/alternative metrics to be developed on the platform. So it is not a repository, because we have repositories funded by ourselves or funded by anyone in the market, so it is much more than that. And again, it is intended for Horizon 2020 as a free complementary service. So free, it is exactly, why is it free? Because in the past, as I said, the costs which incur with open access today are already eligible in the project. So of course, this is also part of the same. So for us, it's a zero-sum game. We pay for the APCs anyhow, so now we will channel it for those who choose in this direction. So the ambition is the added value of the proposal, and I go into two more details in a second, is to reach the target of 100% open access by 2020, to offer this third way for beneficiaries of Horizon 2020 to meet the open access obligations. So no more excuses, let me put it bluntly, but not for Twitter. And then thirdly, of course, to make operational our Commissioner's priority for open science in Horizon 2020. And as I say, under the added value is, of course, that we are not, a little bit of the added value, we are not reinventing the wheel here. We are doing what some of the big funders, private and publicly increasingly, are doing already. To to anticipate some of your questions, it is a sine qua non that we will not do it ourselves. It is simply excluded that a bureaucracy can run a scientific mega journal, because that's actually what it is. It is a scientific mega journal. So we will outsource this. So we will launch a call for tender very soon, specifying the terms of reference for anyone who wants to take the opportunity here to submit the call for tender. And it will be done by the successful bidder according to the standards which we have listed and the parameters which are in the call for tender. It is also a sine qua non that if this doesn't offer the highest possible quality, it will definitely collapse very soon. So I don't think anyone can say that it will be per definition or ex officio a success, but it will certainly not be a success if the quality is not top standard. So that speaks for itself, I would say. So that's why the public procurement is very important. So we are really hoping that we get a lot of good bids there. The timeline you see there, so we are more or less finalizing the terms of reference, and we're going to launch it, but I always hesitate to say it because I'm always too optimistic there. If I say we launch it this month, it's 2 months later, but it needs to be launched in October, and we would like to open, or maybe at the end of the month, but again, don't take this for granted, but it needs to be up and running, the platform, somewhere in 2018. So in between, you have the opening, you have the contract negotiations, which take 6 months, and so on. So that's the idea. So by doing that, Horizon 2020 and the Commission will offer to its beneficiaries of research an alternative way for open access. Not an alternative, a complementary way for open access. Again, not compulsory, but as a possibility. So that's the formal part. That's the formal part of our policy. Now, if you think in the future, and I'm almost finished with our presentation, is open access to publishing the final frontier of publications? I don't think so. I really don't think so. And I think that the discussions on gold, green, or diamond open access are probably, if we look at it in 5 years' time, discussions which we look back at, well, was it really so important? Well, of course it is important, but was it really the only thing we could think about? Because if you think ahead, if you see what is happening in open science, if you see what is happening due to the introduction of digital technologies in science and how that changes the whole research process as a system and not as an output, then I think it is quite realistically to assume, and I think that together we have a responsibility for our scientific system to think about that. So it is quite realistically to assume that we will not only evolve from a peer-reviewed open access publication system to a peer-reviewed open access research workflow. The speed of science and the way it is done is so fundamentally different than when the whole system was more or less embedded in institutions like publishing 50 to 60 years ago, that we can simply not think in 10 years ahead that the only meaningful product of science is at the end of a process, the publication in a journal. So you already see the importance of publishing open data as a self-standing scientific activity. Peer review, as I said, is increasingly becoming an additional scientific activity. It used to be so 300 years ago, but it is additionally becoming again a self-standing activity. In some of the sciences, publishing on a daily basis the results, like even in pharmacogenetics and so on, is becoming standard. Now, all these new ways of publishing the process and making it open, we should, in a certain sense, try to capture that in the scientific system and think about what it means for our publication policy. So that's my final sentence, is that probably publishers have an enormous important role to play there, because you could imagine yourself as not only being a publisher of articles, of books or monographs, but as an open science platform where, in a peer-reviewed way, this new way of doing science is giving right to. So I really think that these are the challenges ahead, and I'm very pleased that some of your associations are deeply looking into all these changes ahead. This is what a poster that I quite like from STM, which is bringing together the ocean. It's a little bit inappropriate given all the hurricanes we have these days, but it shows you that there is a lot of change going on, that your associations are quite, and yourself, you're quite on top of it, and that the future will be much more than only publishing an article at the end of the process, because real-time open science is, in some way, needs to be also evaluated and tributed to in what is the classical way of doing it, which is the peer review. And that's where publishers, of course, have a key role to play. So there is a lot of change going on, mainly induced by the globalization of science and the fact that digital technologies are making data-driven science a new reality. That is a picture. That is a slide which is really illustrating this systemic thinking change, if you want. But let's not go into the details of that. But we all know that it is going on. So we need to anticipate that in terms of publishing activities. So that's a little bit of the picture. So we have had for 10, 15 years a long process of policy on open access to publications. I foresee that for the next 10 to 15 years, we will have a long policy process and discussion on open access for the research process as such, which will imply all the discussions which we have on peer review, which we already have now on gold, green, diamond, and whatsoever, but then for the whole life cycle. So it will make it even more complicated, but at the same time, much more challenging. Is open access here to stay? Well, this is not the audience to question it, but I simply like the quote, so I force it anyway onto the audience. So I really think, I use it a lot when I speak, so I really think that it is self-evident. It is a no-brainer that open access is not only for publication, but for the whole research process is there to stay. Why? Because what you see there, if you do it alone, you go fast. If you do it in group, you go much farther. So that is what it is. What in essence explains the attractivity of open access and why it is irreversible. Although I know there is a lot of conservatism in the scientific system, but it is simply not stoppable if you look at the reality. You will never be out of business as publishers. It's quite logical. Why? Because independent quality assurance, and that's your business, will always be at the core of the science system, whatever part, and that's a fake journal, of course. It's an alternative journal, so on alternative facts. But it is just there to illustrate that whatever happens, if we go for a fully fledged open access research workflow on a fully fledged open access science platform, which you might become in 10 to 15 years, you will always have, of course, at the core of the system quality assurance, and that is peer review. So that will never change. So you have a bright future in front of you. My successor at the Commission will have a bright future in knowing what to do, I assume. So a lot of challenges ahead, which going beyond the traditional discussion. I see in the program that a lot of these things are already being picked up, so it's really encouraging that the publishers themselves are doing this. And to wind up, here you can find some of our information. One more slide. We have launched ourselves an open science monitor where we try to bring together all these facts and figures and indicators in a systemic way. So if you click on it, if you click on one of these boxes, it's a beta version. The fully fledged version will come next year because we just launched the new contract to make it a permanent service. So it is trying to bring together all the data that are there in Europe from everyone, in particular from your association. So this is also a call for contributing there. So we aggregate data. We don't produce new data. You push on it, and you can, for example, then see what is, in this case, the rate of green open access publications compared to journal publications. So again, I invite you to look at it, but my invitation is also please contribute to it, because we only aggregate data, so we're not we are not putting new money in finding it ourselves. So if it is not represented there, it means that we couldn't find it or we were not given the data. So this is a little bit of publicity, but of course, I think it is important that we work together there. So that's about it. I don't know if there is still time or... Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right, please thank Jean-Claude. So, given the announcement that was just made about this interesting new journal, I'm sure there's all sorts of questions from the audience, and we've got a little bit of time here, so yeah, if you've got any questions, just raise your hand and Layla will come with a mic.
Hi, Rob Johnson of Research Consulting. Just wondering if you could elaborate on a couple of things. So one thing that seemed significant from the Competitiveness Council was the emphasis on immediate open access or as short an embargo as possible. So I wonder if you could talk about the relationship between gold and green going forward, so whether green open access is enough. And secondly, just to help put things in a global context, because obviously policies in the US are somewhat different with the emphasis on public access and how you see the sort of the global move and the EC's role within that.
It's easy questions, of course. On the first question, so the relationship between gold and green. Okay, so the official answer is there, of course, that we respect the situation as it is now, meaning you can have it's up to the researcher or the consortium to choose for whatever road forward. It's up to the publishers to determine their conditions. It's not up to us to intervene in the market there. I really think this is not a cheap statement. I think it is a profound view which we have there. This being said, my personal view is that in 10 years' time we will have de facto full open access at the day of publication, punto, and it will be diamond. So no more extra cost anywhere. That's my personal view. Why? Because of all the trends that I said, because of all the alternatives that are possible, because what you see happening in the market, because what you see happening in related markets. If you look at what happens in search engines and what happens in social media and so on. So I think it goes in that direction, and I would be highly surprised if the overwhelming majority of scientific publications in 10 years' time would not be full open access at the day of publication. And it simply is part of the logic and of the speed of the scientific process. About the global, the interesting thing is one of the most interesting things that I did this year on top of all this is so the commission together with our commissioner, together with the Japanese, is chairing the Open Science Work Group of the G7, meeting at the end of this month in Italy. So we had a dedicated group with G7 members, precisely looking at open science, open access issues. And at that level, you have, of course, policymakers at the highest level being present. And it is quite clear there that in the whole world, we have the same debate. Of course, the articulation of the interests is different. But from the political perspective point of view, there is a similar push for open data, for full open access, for going towards open science. And the meeting of the G7 at the end of the month will most likely call for a global approach to going to the G20. So I think this is unstoppable, and I think that this will become a global discussion anyhow. Now, this being said, this will also create an extra problems which we have not yet factored in for the moment. You can, again, speaking for myself, but you can very easily foresee that the discussions on open data become part of the global trade discussions. Because if indeed all those data, as we all say and shout that data are the new oil, well then the logical consequence is that it becomes a vital part of trade, and that is then the next step. So this will probably become a very interesting discussion in the future, but intentionally you can say that there is a global level playing field for pushing these issues more or less at the same speed and at the same intensity.
Hi, so I've got a question about the Open Research Europe platform. So I just want to make sure I'm absolutely clear that what you're looking to build is a technological infrastructure, a platform, rather than a distributed network, for example, somewhat equivalent to publishers' open access deals that they're doing with at country levels, where so different publishers would agree to provide services that meet your requirements.
Well, I can tell you that we are absolutely sure that we are agnostic on this respect. And I'm not saying this as a joke. So we do not impose any structure at all. So we ask for functionalities. Some of them were listed there. We ask for the highest possible quality. And then anyone can tender, and whatever is the best proposal, distributed, centralized, whatever is what will win the bid. So there are many ways to do it, and I know what I would do if I would submit a bid, but that's not the point. The point is that we don't favor any route forward, and we don't favor any technological pathway.
Katrina McCallum from Hindawi, about your publishing platform, and I know that Wellcome and Gates have also launched one recently, but what incentives will there be for your researchers to publish on your specific platform rather than going to traditional journals where they get the usual sorts of rewards by publishing in them? So why will they go to you? And I know Robert's in the room and probably has an answer for the Wellcome platform as well.
Yes, that's a very good question, which I'm sure we can debate for a long time. But there will only be an incentive if it is the highest quality. Let's assume that. Now, assume that we have the highest quality. The incentive is to have relatively fast. So I cannot disclose the terms of reference because otherwise I get problems. But you will see that in the terms of reference we put a certain time cap on the moment between submitting an article and publishing it. So we look at what the average time is, and then we say, well, we want to reduce with X. And we also have put a price cap. So it will be faster and cheaper, which in itself is not an incentive enough. The third part, the first one is the most important one. It must be top quality. So if it is quality, if it is fast and cheap, that will be the incentive. So if you look at it from a researcher, if rather than going into a complex process which takes me so much years or so much months and X money, if I know that I can put it there relatively fast at a relatively cheap, well, actually I don't have to pay for it because it's a zero sum. Maybe that's an incentive, but it is also, I must say, this is no one can predict how successful this will be or how disastrous this will be. But it will be a disaster if this is no quality, that's for sure.
All right, we have time for one last question in the back.
Jean-Sébastien Co from the University of Amsterdam and SciPost. How do you envision... Maybe you can hear me anyway. So this is fantastic from a European perspective, but I'm wondering how you envision internationalization of this. Do you expect American researchers, Asian researchers to also participate to the same degree as European ones?
So, internationalization, insofar that these American researchers are part of the consortia of Horizon 2020, they can take part of it. So it is only, as I said, it's a service for those benefiting from Horizon 2020. And there we have a small percentage, I think it's 3 or 4% of all the researchers are non-European. I mean, by non-European, not located in Europe, because we have a lot of American and other researchers taking part in research programs based in a French, German, English institute. So that doesn't apply there. So there is no problem there at all. Now, again, if you think long term, and if you assume it is a success, and if you don't quote me on Twitter, you can easily see this being developed as a more open platform, not only for Horizon 2020. But that's not up to me to decide for the moment. So if it is successful, well, then something else can happen. And this kind, in these G7 discussions, I hear that in several of the countries being part of the G7, they are playing with the same ideas. So the public funders. So you can even think of a platform of the platforms. I'm just thinking aloud here, and that is falling way beyond my mandate, public mandate. But you see what I mean?
Have you thought how publications on your new platform might be cited? We have a traditional model of citing the journal name, the volume, and so on that everybody recognizes. If we're going to move to an alternative, additional system, we need to have a very clear, well-thought-out citation mechanism.
Yes. Well, there are many things indeed, and it is one of the requirements I hinted at it, but it is one of the functionalities we want the proposer to clearly develop. So it's precisely this. What will be the mechanism there for a scientist to have a reliable citation source? And one of the things which you will see there, and that is not really disclosing it, so we also go into suggesting that maybe consider ORCID type of functionalities. But again, on the other hand, any new journal that is launched has that problem. So it will take X time to establish itself as a reliable source. And that is, I think, the bottleneck. How much time do we need? Does this need to become, as you say, a reliable source?
All right. I'm sure there'll be plenty of time to ask Jean-Claude follow-up questions in the coffee. But for now, let's thank him and move on to the next panel.